The first time the shelter smelled like rain, she was already soaked through, but she did not notice the water on her coat. She stood in the narrow underground corridor with her son asleep against her chest, his small body heavy with fever, and she held him so tightly that her fingers ached, as if she could keep him alive by refusing to let go. The city above them carried on without a thought, lights flickering through the grates, buses groaning past, the distant sound of laughter and music, while she stood alone in the dark with a child who had stopped coughing only when she pressed her lips to his forehead and listened to his breathing like it was a secret she could protect. She did not cry. She could not. The quiet was too fragile, the moment too precious, and she was afraid that if she let the tears fall, the world would hear them and come down on them like a storm. She had found the tunnel by accident, months earlier, when she was walking home late from her cleaning job, the kind of job where you leave before the sun rises and return after it has set. She had taken a wrong turn, a narrow alley that looked like it led nowhere, and the door at the end had been half open, the kind of door that was usually locked, the kind of door people ignored because they had no reason to go inside. But she had a reason. Her son was small, his cheeks too pale, and his breath came in shallow bursts that made her heart jump. She had been given a leaflet at the clinic, a polite warning about air quality, about the rising cost of medicine, about the things you were supposed to do if you lived near the river or the old industrial sites. She had read it in the kitchen with the kettle boiling, the radio humming, her son playing quietly on the floor with his toy train. The words had landed in her like stones. She had looked at the ceiling and wondered, not for the first time, whether the world was built to protect people like her or to ignore them. The tunnel smelled of damp stone and old metal, and at first she had been afraid to go in. The kind of fear that makes you step back and pretend you are not interested. But her son was coughing in the distance, his small body shaking as he tried to sleep, and she had not been able to pretend anymore. She had taken her phone out, its screen cracked from a drop that had happened weeks earlier, and she had shone the light into the darkness. The tunnel stretched downwards, and she had felt a strange pull, not curiosity, but a sense that this was something she was meant to find. She had stepped inside. The shelter was not a shelter yet. It was just a forgotten space under the city, a hollow place where the old pipes ran and the air was thick with dust. But she saw the possibility in it the way a person sees a room in a house that has been empty for years. She saw a place where her son could breathe without the city's exhaust choking him, where the noise above would be muffled, where the world could not reach them with its careless hands. She imagined a small room, a bed, a stove, a window that opened to clean air. She imagined a life that did not depend on the kindness of strangers. She began to build in silence. She did not tell anyone. She did not ask for help. There was no one to ask. Her mother had died when she was a teenager, leaving behind a small house that had been sold to pay the funeral costs, and her father had been gone long before that, a man who had left without explanation and never returned. She had friends, yes, but they lived their own lives, their own struggles, and she had learned not to burden people with the weight of her fear. She worked, she paid the bills, she came home, she fed her son, she cleaned the flat, she made sure the washing was done. And at night, when the world quieted, she went down to the tunnel with a bag of tools and the small amount of money she had managed to save. She started with the basics, because she knew that a shelter was not a romantic thing, not a secret hideaway in a movie. It was a practical space, a space that needed to keep a person alive. She cleared rubble, she dragged old boards and broken bricks, she patched leaks. She learned the sound of the tunnel, the way it echoed when she moved, the way her own breathing sounded too loud in the emptiness. She found an old metal grate that had been left behind, and she used it to create a small ventilation shaft. She found a discarded piece of piping and turned it into a makeshift chimney. She did not know much about building, but she knew how to make something last. The first time she slept there, she woke up with a stiff neck and the taste of dust in her mouth. Her son had slept in her arms, and she had not moved, not even when he had shifted, because she was afraid that if she let him go, he would disappear. She had watched his face in the dim light, his eyelashes fluttering, and she had felt a wave of gratitude so strong it made her chest hurt. She had not known she could feel so much for one small human being. She had not known she could be so afraid of losing him. Above them, the city continued. The world did not notice that she was living underground. People went to work, people argued in shops, people laughed in pubs, people argued on buses. The news reported the usual things: the weather, the politics, the accidents. Nothing about the woman in the tunnel. Nothing about the small life she was trying to save. The city was indifferent, and she understood that indifference was not cruelty, just the nature of a world too big to care about one person's struggle. She started to take her son to the clinic less often. It was not because she did not care, but because she could not afford the repeated visits. The medication was expensive, and the waiting rooms were full of people with their own pain. She would sit in the corner, her son on her lap, his small hand gripping her coat, and she would watch the faces around her. There were mothers with babies, fathers with tired eyes, old men with trembling hands. Everyone had their own story, their own reason for being there. She felt a strange connection to them, a shared knowledge that life was not fair and that you had to fight for every breath. At home, she began to change the way she lived. She stopped buying new clothes. She stopped buying anything that was not absolutely necessary. She sold the things she owned that had once been symbols of a better life. A necklace that had belonged to her mother, a small ring she had worn since she was a teenager, the kettle she had bought on a payday and had been proud of. She sold them quietly, one by one, to people who did not know why she was doing it. She watched the money leave her hands and go into someone else's pocket, and she did not feel any pride or shame, only a grim determination. Her son's life was worth more than any trinket. She also began to work longer hours. She took extra cleaning shifts, early mornings and late nights, when the work was cheaper and the employers were desperate. She walked through streets that were still dark, her breath visible in the cold air, her body tired, her mind always thinking about the shelter. She carried her tools in a bag, her hands raw from the work. Sometimes she would pass a group of people laughing, their faces bright in the streetlights, and she would feel a sudden surge of envy so sharp it made her chest twist. She would look away, because she did not want them to see the way her eyes betrayed her. She did not want anyone to know how much she longed for a normal life. The shelter grew slowly. She added a small bed frame made from reclaimed wood. She built a shelf for the medicine and the small tin of rice she kept for emergencies. She found a battery-powered lamp and learned how to make it last by turning it off whenever she could. She lined the walls with plastic she had found in the alley, trying to keep the damp out. She did not know if it would work, but she did not have any better options. She learned to live with the smell of the tunnel, to sleep through the distant sounds of the city above, to feel the vibrations of trains passing far away. Her son grew stronger, then weaker, then stronger again. His cough came and went like a tide. There were days when he ran around the flat, laughing, his cheeks flushed with health, and she would watch him and feel her heart soar. There were days when he sat on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his eyes hollow, and she would sit beside him and hold his hand and pray silently that he would not be taken from her. She never spoke out loud. She had learned that words were expensive. She had learned that silence could be a form of protection. The city changed around her. The air grew worse in the winter, the streets slick with frost, the river rising higher than it should. The news began to report on the problems that had been whispered about for years: the old pipes breaking, the factories closing, the increase in respiratory illnesses. People complained in the pubs. People blamed the government. People blamed each other. But nothing changed. The air remained heavy, and the people who could afford to leave did, and the people who could not stayed and learned to cough in silence. She began to notice the way her son's breathing changed when he was outside. The smallest walk to the corner shop would leave him winded. He would come back home with red eyes and a sore throat, and she would sit him down and give him water and hold his face in her hands, her thumbs pressing gently against his cheeks. She would watch him swallow, watch his chest rise and fall, and she would feel a fear so intense it was like a physical force. She began to take him to the tunnel more often, not because it was a comfortable place, but because it was a place where the air felt different. The dampness was still there, but it was a clean damp, the kind that did not carry the city's exhaust. She started to keep a small supply of food in the shelter, more than she needed for a single night. She bought rice and beans, canned soup, a small packet of tea. She kept it in a tin box under the bed. She did not tell her son why. She simply said it was for emergencies. He would nod, too young to understand the full weight of what she was doing, but old enough to sense the seriousness in her face. He would run his fingers over the tin, then look up at her with a smile that was half trust, half worry. The shelter became their secret world. She stopped inviting friends to the flat. She stopped going to the park. She stopped allowing her son to stay outside after dark. She did not want anyone to see the changes in him. She did not want anyone to ask questions. She did not want anyone to notice the way his cough had become part of his identity, the way it made him look older than he was. She did not want anyone to see the fear in her eyes. One evening, she returned from work and found her son sitting on the kitchen floor, his knees pulled to his chest, his face turned toward the window. He had been watching the rain. She could tell by the way his shoulders shook that he had been crying. She crouched down beside him and placed her hand on his head. He did not look at her. He did not say anything. He just sat there, the silence between them heavy. She knew, in that moment, that he had begun to understand. He had begun to understand that their life was different. He had begun to understand that his mother was doing something that other mothers did not have to do. She did not know if he understood the full truth, but she knew he felt the weight of it. She felt a surge of guilt so strong it made her chest burn. She had wanted to protect him, but in doing so, she had also made him aware of the danger. She had made him see the world as a place that could take things from you without warning. She made dinner, a simple meal, and they ate in silence. The kettle boiled, the sound filling the small kitchen. The rain continued outside. She watched her son's hands, the way he held his spoon, the way he ate slowly as if he was saving the food for later. She wanted to tell him that she was sorry. She wanted to tell him that she wished she could give him a normal life. But the words would have been useless. They would have been like smoke in the air, gone before they could be understood. Instead, she took him to the shelter. That night, she stayed longer than usual. She sat on the bed with her son beside her, his head resting on her shoulder. She listened to his breathing, to the soft sound of his sleep. She looked around the shelter, at the walls she had patched, at the shelf she had built, at the small tin of food. She thought about how far she had come. She thought about the sacrifices she had made. She thought about the things she had sold. She thought about the long hours at work, the aching back, the numb fingers. She thought about the way her son's face looked in the lamplight, how peaceful he was when he slept. She wondered, not for the first time, whether it was enough. The disaster came quietly, the way disasters often do. It was not a dramatic explosion or a sudden flood. It was a slow, creeping thing, a problem that had been building for years and finally reached a breaking point. There was a leak in the old gas pipes beneath the city, a leak that had gone unnoticed because no one had wanted to pay for repairs. The gas seeped into the air, and the first people to notice were the ones who lived closest to the ground, the ones who could not afford to move. The news reported it late, as if it was an inconvenience rather than a danger. People continued to go about their lives. They continued to breathe. She noticed it first because of the smell. It was faint at first, a strange sweetness in the air. She had learned to trust her senses because she had no one else to trust. She began to feel dizzy, her head light, her heart beating too fast. Her son woke up coughing. She took him to the shelter immediately, her hands shaking. She closed the door behind them, locked it, and pressed her ear to the wall. She could hear the city above, the distant sound of sirens, the sound of people shouting. She could hear the fear. She did not leave. She could have. She could have taken her son and run to the surface, to the street, to the open air. She could have tried to find a place where the gas had not reached. But she knew the city. She knew how quickly people panicked. She knew how easily a child could be lost in a crowd. She knew that the air above was already poisoned. She knew that the shelter, despite its flaws, was the safest place she had. She sat her son on the bed and wrapped her arms around him. She held him close and whispered nothing. She did not speak because speaking would use up oxygen, because speaking would make her voice hoarse, because speaking would make the moment real. She listened to his breathing, and she tried to keep her own breathing steady. She watched the lamp on the shelf, its light flickering as the battery began to fail. She watched the small tin of food, the only thing that stood between them and hunger if the disaster lasted. She watched the walls, the damp, the plastic she had used to seal the cracks. She realized, with a sudden clarity that made her stomach drop, that the shelter was not just a shelter. It was a trap. It was a place that could keep them alive for a while, but it was not designed for a long-term emergency. It had no proper ventilation. It had no way to filter the air. It had no way to bring in clean oxygen. It was built for a child who needed a break from the city's air, not for a disaster that poisoned the very atmosphere. She began to panic, but she did not show it. She had learned that panic was contagious. She had learned that a child could sense it and become worse. She forced herself to think, to find a solution. She looked around the shelter, searching for anything that could help. She found the old metal grate she had used for ventilation. She remembered the small pipe she had left as a makeshift chimney. She thought about the way the tunnel air felt, the way it was cooler and heavier than the air above. She realized that if she could get the air moving, if she could create a draft, she might be able to bring in air that had not been poisoned. She stood up, her legs trembling, and opened the door just enough to slip the pipe through the crack. She held it steady, her hands shaking, and listened to the air outside. She could feel the gas in the shelter, the way it made her head spin. She knew she had to act quickly. She pushed the pipe further out, and she felt a slight shift in the air. It was not much, but it was something. Her son began to cough again, his body shaking. She looked at him, and she felt a fierce love so strong it hurt. She thought about all the things she had done for him. She thought about the sacrifices, the silence, the long nights. She thought about the way he had looked at her when he was scared, the way he had trusted her without question. She knew, in that moment, that she would do anything to keep him alive. She realized the truth, the harsh truth, that had been sitting in the back of her mind for weeks. She had built the shelter for him, but she had not built it for the worst-case scenario. She had not built it for a disaster that would make the air itself deadly. She had not built it for a world that could turn against them without warning. She looked at her son and made a decision. She took the oxygen mask from the first aid kit, the one she had bought months earlier because she had seen it on sale and thought it might be useful. She put it on her son's face. She adjusted it carefully, making sure it fit. She watched his eyes close as he breathed in the clean air, the way his shoulders relaxed. She felt a surge of relief so intense it made her dizzy. She had done it. She had saved him. Then she took the mask off. She did not hesitate. She did not think about herself. She did not think about the pain. She did not think about the fact that the gas was already in the shelter, that every breath she took was a risk. She simply placed the mask on her own face and breathed in. The air was sharp and cold. She looked at her son, his chest rising and falling, and felt a peace so deep it was almost unbearable. She thought of how he would grow up, remember this night, and one day understand the full weight of what she had done. She held him close, the silence between them full of meaning, and felt the world fade at the edges. Above, the city burned with panic. People ran, coughing, sirens blaring. The world did not know about the woman, the shelter, or the sacrifice she had made. In the shelter, the lamp flickered and went out. Her son stirred, and she held him as if she could hold the world together. She saw the small tin of food, the patched walls, the life she had built, and realized she had done all she could. Her last thought was of him. When rescue teams arrived, the boy was alive. She lay still, peaceful. He survived, grew up, and never spoke of that night or the shelter. He carried the silence and love she had given him. Years later, passing the old alley, he paused by the cold brick, remembering the shelter and the quiet sacrifice that had saved his life. The city never knew why